Welcome back to the Queer Circle podcast, where queer healers come to the mic to share their journeys and what they tell their younger selves. Today's guest is James E. Stewrt. James is a gay Hoodoo practitioner and Rootworker of over 10 years. He's also the owner and operator of Conjure Cleaning, based in Durham, North Carolina. Welcome to the Queer Circle, James.
I was born in Durham, North Carolina, and the family I grew up in is very religious. The church we grew up in was Worldwide Church of God. That church was later defined as a cult, by which I think some of the rules that they had were just defined as cultish. It wasn't like, that word strikes up very like a lot of imagery, but I feel like it was more, the church we grew up in was very kind of Seventh-day Adventist style, a little almost Jehovah's Witnessy, but like somewhere in between that. Like, we went to church on Saturdays. You weren't supposed to hang out with secular friends. I think a number of people got excluded from the church if they did secular things or hung out with secular people. Like, families split throughout that church because if you were, deemed as, if the church said you're not supposed to communicate with this family member, families would do that. Luckily, our family kind of didn't do that, and we've, to my knowledge, maintained relationships. But that was the mind frame of my parents. They grew up in that church. My mom grew up in Chicago. My dad grew up in North Carolina. They met through the church. So that church was deep in our family. And in some ways, it's kind of scary to think about like how that made religion and God so tangible and so like hard set on worldviews for us and me growing up. But in other ways, like that has been like my bedrock of like, well, that's how I came to know God. And I'm thankful for my parents for fostering a relationship with God that existed outside of church, that existed outside of them. They made sure that my relationship with God was like, its own universe. And because of that, it was like, well, even when I had questions about, am I gay? I'm not asking my parents first, I'm asking God. And that conversation was extremely beautiful because that's what they helped foster. So it, in a weird way, it was like, okay, maybe the channel in which it came through was a little convoluted and toxic, but God still came through. So one thing that was a little hard to deal with, not a little hard, it was like one of the hardest things to deal with was coming out to my parents, and their response was not good. Their response was, well, what does the Bible say? And at that time, I think I was like 12, 13. Yeah, I was somewhere between 12 and 13. And I just found a book earlier that summer about Wicca. So like I was already kind of questioning my relationship with God. I wasn't really feeling that sort of like call and response relationship with God where I just sit and wait. Like I pray and then I wait and hope that my message, my prayer was heard. Like I was like, I need more. Like I need a conversation. I don't need just like, I wait. And by grace of finding a book in my sister's nightstand while I was snooping as like just an annoying little brother, I'm like, oh, what is this book about witchcraft? That opened up the door for me to like explore different pathways and religions. So by the time I came out to my parents, them asking me, well, what does the Bible say about this? I was like, well, I'm not really feeling the Bible right now. So it was like, well, we don't have any tools to like, control him. And then on my end, I'm like, you're my parents. Like, you're supposed to love me. What is this programming? What is this, sort of robotics that has you snap into my enemies when you've seen, like, I'd been bullied all throughout elementary and middle school, to the point where I had to be in therapy. I had nervous breakdowns because I remember, like, probably first day of fourth or fifth grade, having a panic attack because I didn't want to walk in the class, because I knew most of those kids called me the F word or gay kid or like all these things. And I'm like, I don't want to go. My parents saw all of that. So for them to like throw, well, what does the Bible say? When I'm like, I'm just stepping into a part of myself that you acknowledged and seen my entire life. So I was just angry, and I was filled with anger for like a long time. And we fought. We would argue, and um, I it was just back and forth like hell in the household for a long time. Um, and that didn't sort of resolve until I was 18, and I ran away to New York because I was like, well, I'm 18, I'm grown now. I graduated and just left and told them, please don't try to find me. And I didn't talk to them for a while, like 6 months or so. And that sort of, a lot of things happened in that time of me trying to figure out who I was and trying to figure out, my life on my own for the first time, like jumping in the deep end. And I'm just like, I realized there are spiritual forces making sure that I was good, because as many times as I encountered death, I'm like, that does not make sense. Hindsight, I'm like, that does not make sense for me to survive that. And I regret the way in which, no, I regret the impact that it had on my parents, because that was very traumatic for them. I'm thankful that it eventually brought us together, and it made them see me in my fullness of my life, and not just, you're our son and we need to parent you and teach you and make sure you do the right things. But that experience, it rechanged the dynamic of our family. I was like thinking about how The Wiz was one of my favorite movies growing up, and it's like, well, duh, of course it's going to be my favorite movie growing up, because like everything is within us this whole time. And yeah, and of course Diana Ross, but like everything, it's here the whole time. So when it comes to mentors and heroes, it is such a it's such a like up down, all over the place sort of topic. Because so I started practicing hoodoo when I was in high school. I want to say around 18. That's when I figured out, oh, what is hoodoo? Because at the time, there at the time there weren't many books out, and the main books that were out were from white people describing what hoodoo was. Like Lucky Mojo had a monopoly on the hoodoo conversation at that time. So I remember finding a book. I forgot the name. Tiana, I forgot her last name, but she wrote a book that opened up my eyes to what hoodoo was, and it's about the Black American experience spiritually, and understanding that. And so when I opened up that door, it led to me wanting mentors, and that has been a non-linear road that has been a blessing, where I found people who taught me amazing things, whether they meant to teach me something or whether through their actions I learned something of like, oh, that is what one should not do, or that is but it's all been a beautiful lesson. And even in mentors in terms of like queer life and understanding my gayness. And when I went to New York, I had a gay mother, and at the time I was caught up in a lot of mess, and so was she. So it was very much this like I hate to say this, but a very sort of dark teacher who like taught me a lot of things that in hindsight, I was like, yeah, I was really hanging on to some of that stuff, but it wasn't good. Now I'm like, oh, the like when you take a couple steps out and you're like, oh, even bad teachers teach you a lot of things that you need, but it's like it's just very interesting because in meeting her or any of the number of mentors that I've encountered, good and bad, it's like, oh, you don't know what you're going to learn from them until it's very like sometimes until after your experience with them. So it's always been very interesting. Right now, I don't have like a spiritual mentor really or anything like that, like a mother or father. It's really just my family. I'm thankful for the experiences that I've gone through to sort of bring things full circle with my family, where now I'm recognizing my role with them and I'm very much receiving like insight that I need for now and years ahead from like my grandfather, from my nana, from aunts and uncles in the family who, you know, sure, when I was little, they were saying things like, oh, make sure you read Proverbs or, oh, make sure you read this. But it hits so much differently when you're able to see it in a context of just going through stuff where I don't like I don't see it as like religious rules, but I see it as this is the vehicle and this is the vessel of which spirit is transmuting wisdom through you, that it could literally be any religion on the planet. Like we could have any dynamic, we could be any culture, and like that is still flowing through. So now I'm like, thank you. Like now I see it in a much different light, and I'm so much more thankful for it than I was, when I was an angsty teenager or when I was a kid who just hadn't had life understanding and knowledge. So now I'm like, mentors are in my family, and I am also recognizing my role as someone in my family who I'm becoming more of an adult. So it's like I have to take care of my family. I have to make sure that we're good. I have to, do those sorts of things. So the dynamics are changing, and they're very different and good. It's interesting. When I think about like some of the dark times now, I'm like, oh, yeah, we really went through some dark times with my mother. So, I'm 18, 19, 18 going on 19 at that time. And I was caught up in drugs and partying and all this stuff. And I just remember the guy I was dating at that time, I was just so like out there in terms of not being connected to much of anything that I needed to be in alignment. But my mother was, I don't really know her title in Ifa, but she was some devotee and walked with the Orishas. And it it was very much like twisting of the truth, so that, oh, well, they know what I'm doing, so it's okay, and da 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 da. And it's like, in hindsight, I'm like, but they don't want that for you. They're helping you and they're protecting you and making sure you're good because you're all the way out here. But like, they want you to be in a much more fullness of life. But in that era of my life, I remember that was the first time I felt the presence of death. That was the first time I'd really just played my whole life. I learned a lot in that season, which I still hold or reference to today. I really just look back and I'm like, I'm really thankful for death revealing itself to me in that way, where now I just know, and I have a better relationship, not perfect, but a much better relationship with sensing it, speaking to it, and having a conversation versus running or, yeah, being bombarded by it. I do feel like it's helped me in my work with other people. It's helped me in my work with myself now. Now I'm kind of in the realm of like, unfortunately, just magical practitioners of all walks, we deal with hexes and people sending spirits and jealousy and blah, 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 blah. Had I not had that relationship and had that understanding of like, well, you can just talk to it. You can just talk to that energy. And as in the same way you can talk to God and hear a response, you can talk to death and get a response. You can talk to your ancestors. Like that sort of understanding of just keep it very conversational as much as you would with a relative or friend or someone that you see at the grocery store and you want to ask something of them, right? That's been my like reference point of, okay, whenever I'm confronted with a new energy or a new spirit, I'm like, just go back to that. Like, hi. Instead of being like, how do I, how, like running for reference and books, it's just like, maybe you could just boil it down to like, how does one speak to another spirit, period? So I've definitely gone through seasons of depression and setbacks and imposter syndrome. And I feel like that sort of like dent in my spirit came from getting bullied at a young age and like always questioning yourself and always questioning, well, was I talking too loudly? Was I talking too feminine? Was I not, what do I need to change about myself? How do I fit in? So that, not checking that for a long time, and not healing that for a long time creates a space for other things to come in and be questioned. It's like, you could receive all this praise of the work that you're doing, but if that dent is still there, it's like, well, you're just waiting for it to come back. You're waiting for that feeling of, well, you're not really doing well. You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Why would you do that? Like that criticism that's unmerited and unjustified, just you're waiting for it to come back. And it took shape when I lived in Los Angeles. I lived in Los Angeles for 7 years because I wanted to go to school. I went to school for acting and I wanted to do that for a while. And that could have been, actually it was, I did heal a lot of that settling there. And I had to redo it again when I stepped into this chapter of life. And it's like, all right, let's address this imposter syndrome. But now I'm recognizing that it's not necessarily something that's supposed to take you out of what you're doing. It's not supposed to make you lift your hands and say, well, am I supposed to be doing this? I guess not. If I'm questioning myself like that, that's not the point. I feel like it's supposed to refine one to, as a test, to make sure that they are rooted in confidence of what they are doing. So I went through a bit of an imposter syndrome towards the tail end of last year, where it's like, am I doing everything I can be doing to the best of my ability? Well, let's explore that. And then it actually became fun. It's like, okay, like I went through all my processes, I pulled out all my things, and I'm just like, let's honestly look at like what's working well, what's not working well, and let's just have an honest conversation, because you don't want to keep progressing and have questions about something that could have been addressed on your own time. So it's like, now I'm like not negating an imposter syndrome sort of thought. It's like, well, hold on, let's question this. Let's, explore this and see if something can be refined and something can be worked on, because I'm not perfect. And if I was, I'd probably not be here. So I still have work to do. And as long as I have air in my lungs, so let's see what needs to be refined and worked on. And obviously there's a point where you just need to rest and just, relax on things. But even that, I've got a better relationship in terms of questioning myself and confidence. And it's like, okay, I'm much more grounded. When it comes to peace, I feel like that state is always like come and go. Just like confidence, it's like, yes, I've gotten a much better, grasp on it, but it's still, as the day changes, I'm losing peace, or I'm, so I have to be mindful of where I am with it. And I think just the way I understand things, and my spirits know how I learn, or they knew how I used to learn. I'm getting much better at this, but getting to that point of I've had enough. Like I've had enough of, in terms of peace, being stressed out by everything and every little situation. It's like, pause. I need to get back to, what feels good mentally, and taking those steps out of the situation, and, looking from a bird's eye view helps put things in perspective. And it's like, actually, a lot of this shit doesn't matter, and I don't need to hold on to it, or I don't need to care about it. Same thing with confidence. It's like you get to a point where you're like, actually, I can't keep being apologetic, or I can't keep being nice and betraying myself continuously for the sake of other people. It's like, no, hold on. You just get angry. Like a part of you just snaps and grows, and it's like, I can no longer keep making concessions for other people and not putting myself first. So that side of myself started to grow, and it feels very comfortable. Like it feels very comfortable to stand up for myself. Whereas in my teens, I was just like, not comfortable with that at all, very apologetic for myself, almost apologetic for existing, and going through like several series of just like, it's like, how much more of myself can I cut off for other people? And then you're just like, all right, this is ridiculous. Like, I'm done. Unfortunately, not everybody, like, when I was saying like my spirits understand how I learn, I'm like, not everybody has to, and not everybody should go through that form of hard-earned confidence, or hard-earned peace, or hard-earned any state. I don't think that has to be, it's not the route for everyone, and it shouldn't be. Like, you don't have to touch the iron to know that it's hot. You can just understand, like, actually, I trust that this is bad for me, or I trust that I don't need to give to this situation. But that's how I learned, and now I'm just like, got it. What I try to bring to the community is, gosh, I'm going to butcher that parable. And I don't know why I'm going to a biblical parable, but it's that one, you teach a man to fish versus, you give a man a fish. And it's like, that really should be the mindset and attitude of everybody in every healing space, anywhere. It's like, each of us has an ability to heal within ourselves, and we should not be reliant on, external forces. We can consult and seek out people to help us, but like that thing should be awakened and generating on its own. Otherwise, it's like you're like an addict who's always needing a fix. I always need a fix. I always need this. It's like, well, maybe you should just wake up yourself and know that that should be a generative thing within you. Like, that should be woken up. And my goal, my hope is that the people that come across me, I am waking that up within them, so that like my therapist said 2 weeks ago, she's like, the goal is that you eventually don't need me, or go to a very minimal, like, monthly. I mean, that's where we are now, but I'm just like, that's my goal with my clients, is like, the goal is that I just help you get back in alignment, and you're just on your way. And maybe down the road you might need help because something happens or something comes up, but it's not supposed to be like a weekly, daily sort of check-in. Like, I need this. No, you don't. Like, I'm very clear on, like, I can help you, but you don't need me. Like, that's the goal to get across. yes, I can help you, but you don't need me. And that's, I don't know why yes, I do know why that's scary for people to say, because they want to feel like, you know, you need me and I'm the valuable resource that you always need to be contributing to. And, but it's like, if you're so tightly holding on to that idea of you always need to be in that exchange with people, that leads to some really toxic places. Even with the best intentions of it, it's like that just leads to some really bad dynamics, some really bad situations. It's like the spirit sees you, and let people let people learn that they can heal themselves. Like, you know, so that's hopefully what I'm bringing to the community. Like that whole kiss the ring like mentality is like, how did you fit that in a healer mindset modality? Like, no. Respect is one thing and that's separate, but it's like bow down and you will get your healing. No. And it's crazy because that is one of the nuggets that I take from growing up in Worldwide Church of God. I'm like, I recognize that early on. I'm like, no. Now, like my parents, it's funny. My parents, I don't think they knew that they were teaching me this, or how it would play out in my understanding, but they were very much teaching me you should question authority respectfully. Like you should question, you know, respect is earned. And just because you have a title, just because, you know, shit, just because you're the president, like whatever your title is, and where, like that respect from people still has to be earned by your works, by your actions, by who you are, you know? So that whole like kiss the ring as a healer thing, it's just like, just because you have a title doesn't mean shit. It's like, what are you doing? That's where you get people to be like, you know what? Respect. I'm like, what would I say to my past selves? I hate, no, I don't hate this response, but I'm like, I don't know that I would say anything to my past selves. I would try my best in this scenario if I could go back in time. If I have, like, I'm actively creating and imagining with this, that I have the ability to somehow imbue energies to myself, and that would just be love. Because knowing myself, my stubborn ass was still gonna, like, if I could tell myself anything in the past, my stubborn self at, you know, 7 years old was still gonna do, you know, the outrageous shit that I did. At 14, I was still gonna do that shit. You know, at 18, I was still gonna do that shit. Like now my relationship with my ancestors, I'm like, yeah, I get why you guys were quiet then, because you knew it didn't matter what you said to me. It did not matter. I was still going to do stuff. And now I'm like, well, let me just sit down and listen. Like now I've learned that aspect, but like if I went back in time and tried to tell myself anything, so like my understanding with my ancestors, I'm like, the whole time they were sitting in the background just pouring love into me. Yes, they were moving things and making sure that people didn't do things, and like making sure that I was good where I couldn't even see to pray or ask or think to, you know, just, you know, they were making sure I was good. But I would just, in some of those dark times, just pour love back into myself. And I've been able to, through meditation, through sitting in baths and just reflecting on where I betrayed myself at times, or where I held on to a betrayal from someone else and just held on to it as if it was something like a scrapbook thing that I just had to hold on to, like a receipt almost. Like it's like you can let that go. And it's like I don't need to keep mulling over this. I don't need to keep reflecting on it. I don't need to keep playing it back. Those are like the hindsight sort of lessons where I'm like, it's okay. Just let the guilt go, let the shame go of those experiences. But yeah, I know anything I told myself back then, Well, I'm still gonna do it. Yeah. I think if anything that I would want to leave, like as a last thought, is something we all this, that we're in this time, 2021, and the world is where it is, all should be doing is getting real clear on self and real clear on seeing yourself and what we're doing and questioning some of those things, because the quickness that is, for any one of us to get caught up in something is like, it's so easy to just get lost in the chaos of everything that's happening right now. I'm staring at some glasses of water on my altar, and it's just like clarity. It's clarity of self is what will help prevent that, is being able to see yourself with clarity and know how you move and know how you're affected by things. And with a quickness, you'll be able to not get caught up with whatever the news is telling you, whatever your environment's telling you, whatever your community might be spreading. Like I'm noticing that like people are blasting certain messages throughout different communities, and it's like, that's not helpful. that's not helping anyone. You're sowing seeds of division. But like, if you're caught up in whatever it is you're caught up in, alliances or agreements or concessions or whatever it is, you can't see things with clarity. So you have to take steps back and see yourself with clarity and honesty. So that's what I would want to share with anybody right now. That's very important to do.
Thank you, James, for joining us today in the Queer Circle, and thank you, listener, for coming along. If you'd like to learn more about James' work, check him out on Instagram at The Conjure Cleaner, or go to his website, conjurecleaning.com. You can also go to queercirclepodcast.com for this information and more. Music from today's episode provided by Purple Fluorite. Purple Fluorite's other works can be found anywhere music can be streamed.